Welcome back. And for those of you who this is our first time together, I'm glad I could be here today. So I apologize. I've got some um, camera, excuse me, camera issues because I'm unfortunately, unlike you guys, I am at work in the office, and of course, I have all of the issues with government computers and what works and what doesn't on our network. So. Um, are you guys able to see the slides? Because right now I am not. It's just kind of spinning.
I can see the slides.
Y'all can see that?
Oh,
Okay.
okay. So I can't see my own slides. So this ought to be interesting. And here we go with our wonderful navigating through logistics when the world has cooties and when the world doesn't have cooties, but you have limitations because of networks and things like that. So a little bit about myself. So I am retiring at the end of this year. I will have on the 31st of December, and I will be 1 week shy of 42 years of federal service. I retired from the Air Force in 2002. Um, and I'm originally from North Carolina. But when I joined the Air Force in 1981, I could never get stationed back here. So it wasn't until about 12 years ago that I was able to come back here, and I started working here at Forces Command. And so when I retire at the end of the year, I'll have over 20 years of civilian protocol experience. Um, and it has definitely been a ride. So if you could, let's go to the next slide, and I will try to keep up with you guys. And this should be our mission statement. There we go. Yes, I have slides. I have slides. Okay, so when I first got here to Forces Command, we really didn't have a good mission statement that I felt kind of told what we did. I had come from an Air Force environment, at a joint command, and I had gotten a thank you note from at one point from the Deputy Director of the National Security Agency, or NSA. And there was something on that note that really struck me, and I thought, wow, this is the whole reason why we do what we do. And so I got with the folks in my office and we crafted the mission statement. And basically, I'm sure everybody's got one, but for us, it's to create that environment where guests can concentrate fully on the core issues motivating their visit. And whether that's going to be a social event, a meeting, international engagement, a briefing, a conference, you name it. But the thing that he thanked us for when that deputy director of NSA, when he had visited the command, was that he was able to concentrate fully on the issue motivating his visit. And so what that meant for us is that we basically took care of every other need that he could possibly have and anticipate that need, so that all he had to do was just show up and do whatever he needed to do to get the job done and to work with our team. And we were very successful at that. Next slide. So, um, here we were chugging along, chugging along, chugging along, and then all of a sudden, this wonderful thing called COVID happened, and basically it shut our command down. And what happened to us, probably very similar to what happened to you guys, but all of our visits, ceremonies, everything was immediately canceled because we really had never had to deal with anything like this. We didn't know uh, how long we were going to be shut down. We didn't know how we were going to navigate through it, how we were going to negotiate it. So they basically said, hey, everything's shut down. Take your computers and go home, which meant that we had to start, teleworking. And it was basically max telework. The only folks that were coming into the building and onto this installation, it was like a ghost town for those individuals who were mission essential. And since everything had been canceled, we didn't have there was no reason for us to be here. We had a couple of soldiers that were here because they had other events or other jobs. One of them made sure that everybody was accounted for, and the other one was one of the drivers. So the main folks that do all the FORSCOM stuff for the Army were coming in. But the rest of us, if we didn't have anything going on, we were basically, at home. So for us, it tested the comms capability. Once we figured out that everybody could actually get onto the net and continue to work, doing whatever we had left to do while the rest of the post was shut down, we were able to do that. So I set up my own office, basically mimicked what I had here. And we spent about probably the first, I would say, 6 months or so cleaning up files and doing some housekeeping. I mean, we really didn't have anything going on. And so then as we started to open things back up and the Army decided, hey, there are some things that we just have to do in person. That's when we started coming back into the office. We were still at minimum manning, which meant that you could only have, at first, I think it was like 25% of your workforce in. So we were rotating folks in. Then it was 50%. Then I was one of the lucky ones that was asked to come in full time because we were starting to build the calendar back up and put things back on the calendar and start to reach out to folks and say, hey, we're starting to get opened up for business. The base basically shut down. The building shut down for those individuals who didn't have an ID and didn't have a need to be here. So it used to be you could just show up at the gate, you could run in and get a pass. And if you had, a valid reason for coming on post, all of that stopped. I mean, when I say it was literally a ghost town, I mean it was literally a ghost town. So those of you that may or may not know Fayetteville, we really don't have a lot going for us as far as venues and things like that. So there were a lot of, downtown venues and things that closed, and some of those businesses never came back. We had several restaurants that we used to use on a regular basis for some of our events, and, a little bit more high-end places. And they just were not able to sustain their business, and they didn't come back. So now we still have the difficulty in finding places to host visitors off post, and of course all of that forced us to scrutinize and prioritize our business and try to figure out what was important, what wasn't important, what we had to do in person, and then what we could either do via Teams or via video teleconferencing or something like that. So basically we had to ask ourselves the 5 W's. Next slide, please. And I would say that these are not necessarily in order because, are you able to see it? Did it flip for you guys? Okay, so I would venture to say that probably the last one there, typically we ask who, what, when, where, and why. I would venture to say that probably that last one could be moved up to the first block because it was really touch and go there. And we had to ask ourselves these 5 questions very critically because we just didn't know what we were up against. We didn't know what we didn't know. So, we had to say, well, why are we having this event? Is it absolutely necessary for our mission? A lot of the social events, that was the first thing that went. But some of the meetings and the conferences and things like that had to be done in person, we had to get in here and figure out how the heck we were going to make it happen and make sure that we were able to make the command shine. Of course, we asked who's going to benefit, who's going to attend, who's going to support the event. We found out real early on that a lot of the folks that we were used to counting on for certain support activities weren't here to support us anymore. We had to do it basically on our own or figure out how to do it on our own. And we realized that we are a little bit more self-supporting than we thought we were. We did not realize that when we got together and worked as a team that we could really do a lot more than we could. And so that was actually a plus coming out of COVID. And then, of course, we had to make sure that we met the expectations from the senior staff because they still expected us to be able to put on a first-rate, first-class event, even though we did have the limitations. Figuring out when the best time to have the event. We had folks that sometimes, those that were able to travel and come in from out of town, because the airlines, there was issues with the airlines. There was issues with rental cars. If you all remember, we had, I think a lot of the rental car companies at the airports and stuff started selling off their inventory. So we had to allow people time, to travel if they needed to come, especially from the Washington, D.C. area. There was a lot of just traveling down during the day. So we tried to time things so it would be in the middle of the week, or it would be on a Monday where they could travel on the Sunday, or on the Friday so they could travel back on a Sunday, and then it would be missing minimal time, from the office. Where the event should be held. Again, we lost a lot of our off-post venues, and we weren't eating off-post anyway at that point. But we still had to figure out how we were going to feed people. It was just a lot of questions that we had to sit down and ask ourselves, how we're going to get through this. Next slide, please. Now, when we started thinking about, for the planning purposes, about who was going to be able to attend and who wasn't, I don't know what it was like for you all, but for us, there was a lot of guidelines because we are on a federal installation. So we had to deal with the folks that are vaccinated, the folks that were unvaccinated. And as you recall, we didn't have access to vaccines initially. So those first few months, we really, when I say we didn't do anything, we didn't do anything. And when we did come into the building, we were all masked up, doing the social distancing, minimal amount of folks that were in the headquarters. People, again, everybody just suspected that everybody else had cooties. So we weren't coming in too close a contact from them, with other folks. So we had to look at the legalities of how we were going to be able to bring folks into the headquarters once they started lifting some of the restrictions. Who can you ask, about vaccinations? What do you do if somebody's unvaccinated? So we were going through that. It was literally a legal, quagmire, I guess you could say. We were back and forth, updates just about every other day about what we could do and what we couldn't do. So we decided to start looking at some of our virtual options, which we really actually had not even explored for the most part prior to COVID. Every now and then we might have, somebody videotape a ceremony or something, or we might have something posted on Facebook. We'd get our PAO to post it on the ForceCom page, but we really had not looked at what we could do to, get mostly ceremonies, I would say, out to the public when folks couldn't travel because the airlines, for whatever reason, and they were, stuck at home. So we decided to start exploring that. We got with our comm folks, and we were able to actually set up Teams concept where we could basically videotape and do live ceremonies just like we're doing right here. We set up a camera and we're able to, to broadcast it. We also did Facebook for those individuals who weren't tied to any kind of WebEx or DoD Teams or anything like that. And we started combining events. Where we might have two ceremonies that had maybe the same group of folks that would be attending it, we might combine those two events, or we would do a ceremony in conjunction with a conference so that folks that were here could enjoy the ceremony in person, and those that weren't, we could still televise it or do it via VTC. And then we had to start looking at how we were getting the word out, because here in our headquarters, we use pretty much three means of getting the word out. We have our digital signage that's throughout the building, so we can announce things that are internal to the headquarters so that the folks, walking through the hallways can see what's coming up. We send out hard copy invitations. And then, of course, we do our electronic invitations. And then, of course, we all started praying early and praying often because we never really knew what we would be able to rely on as far as the comms. Because initially everybody's fighting for the same bandwidth and the same space, And some of those capabilities were stretched pretty thin. For the most part, we ended up, our G6 folks were able to navigate the difficulties and keep us online. Next slide. So specifically, I talked about a little bit about the digital signage that we use throughout the building. And then, of course, there's the snail mail, which is the worst method. And I don't know if you all have to rely completely on sending emails, or excuse me, not emails, but sending invitations directly through the mail. That is our last method that we try to use. The only time we ever send invitations or anything like that through the mail is if it's somebody who, like my father, is electronically challenged and thinks that it's not natural to have a, he calls his cordless phone, or his, his phone at the house, the phone what ain't got no cord. And when he puts his cell phone in his
Elisabeth, did we lose you? Can y'all hear Elisabeth? No.
I lost her too.
Yep. Elisabeth, I think we lost you. Let's see. Elisabeth, can you hear us?
CTs. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, there we
can hear
go.
you.
Okay,
There you are.
good. Yeah, okay. And so that really, and because again, we were not in the office initially, when we were starting to plan, we sent out the e-invitations, and we didn't have to worry about having somebody here or forwarding the phone, so that folks would have to, sit by their phone and write down all the RSVPs just to turn around and go in and put them into the system. Next slide, please.
Can I ask how all
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask how all of that maybe affected your attendance? If this was maybe a little different for some?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will show you, I've got some examples of some invitations. So basically what happened was, when we initially started sending out the invitations, we would have to put a cap on it, because we can only physically have so many folks in the headquarters. And I've got some seating charts and things that I'll show you in a minute to show you kind of how we did that. But yeah, so we would basically say, hey, first come, first serve. Or when we reached capacity, we would rack and stack the individuals that were actually attending, and we put the word out pretty quick in our meetings. Hey, we will please RSVP, but you may be asked to view it electronically if we have too many people that need to attend in person, especially when it comes to I would say ceremonies is the big one. Folks want their families there. And as soon as you start bringing the families in, that's going to eat up a lot of the number of seats that you have. And those are the folks that we really want to take care of anyway. So what we would do is once we reached the threshold, we would just start sending emails to the folks who had RSVP'd and say, hey, I know you understand that we're going to have to ask you to, view this electronically. Do you have the link? We would resend the link. And, initially we had a couple of people who I think were not necessarily offended, but they kind of felt like, well, you sent me this invitation. But then as folks started to we started to get our groove, they started to realize, yeah, this is what you're going to have to do. And a lot of times we get folks who say, hey, I would really love to attend in person, but I understand. So let me know if I got a seat. And that's how we would handle it. So everybody realized that we were all in the same boat. And I like to say that boat was sometimes sinking quicker than we like. So next slide. So this is a copy. This is one of our digital announcements. And so we would, pre-COVID, for the most part, it would go up there, and we wouldn't even really put uh, a link on it. And oh my God, this is an old one because we don't even use Skype anymore. But even after COVID, we started doing stuff. Uh, a little combination of both in person and online. And so the good thing about this one is that these slides come up on our homepage. And I don't know if any of you have this capability at your businesses, so that if you're walking through the hallways, the slides are constantly flipping and you have different announcements and things like that. The advantage of this one is that because we can look at it on our slide on our homepage, you can go in if you know that the event's happening, and you can actually pull it up and click on the link, so you're not sitting there trying to write the link down while it's scrolling through in the hallways. So this was something we would typically put out there for those individuals who wouldn't get a by name invitation. So that the folks that worked in this case with Blaise Albert or had known him, worked with him in the building, could see it in the hallway and say, oh gosh, that's right, Blaise is retiring. And they would be part of what we would call our standing room only crowd, but they would at least have some visibility into the actual event. And this one right here was I think one of the very first ones that we did via Skype, and it actually, thank God, worked out that day, because he had a lot of folks who weren't able to travel in for this one. Next slide. I mentioned earlier about putting together hard copy invitations. So for us, this is, like I said, this is a means that we will use if we've got folks who don't have emails, or if we have folks who just want like a souvenir or something for the scrapbook. I know I usually get, like when we have ceremonies and stuff, the parents of whoever's being honored who will want to have extra invitations like this, or to give to the individual who's actually the honoree, to pass out to folks that maybe they don't have their email address or that they run into. We'll run a couple of extra ones. So, but this particular one this is for one event. This was our change of command ceremony that we just had back in July. It was the first big event that we had post-COVID. We had 700 plus people come, and it was outside in front of the headquarters building on 8 July at 9 o'clock in the morning, when I swear the temperature must have already been about 100 degrees when we got outside. But for this particular event, we had 6 tents out in front of the headquarters. And we really, when we first started planning it, we thought, okay, it's a pretty big deal. Our incoming commander was going to be promoted to his 4th star. The Chief of Staff of the Army was coming in to officiate. And then our 4-star commander, General Garrett, was going to retire. So this was one of those situations where we decided we were going to combine those events, especially. So the promotion ceremony for General Pappas was the very first ceremony, and it was separate. The change of command and retirement ceremony were both combined, which in the Army is a little bit unusual, because typically what they'll do is they'll do a change of command ceremony and then they'll do a separate retirement ceremony. But again, because we had so many people that were coming in, so many people that were on both invitation lists, and we wanted to make sure that we combined the ceremony so that we could get everybody in. We could do it as early as we could in the morning, because we knew that the later it got in the day, the hotter it would get, and it definitely did. So we made a conscious decision to combine those two ceremonies. And earlier I said pray early and pray a lot. On this particular one, we had to have a backup indoor plan, but there was absolutely no way on God's green earth that we could fit 700 people into this headquarters in any one spot. Especially with COVID. Outdoors, we didn't have to worry about the masks. We did have some folks who felt more comfortable because they were still sitting in close proximity to each other. They did still wear masks outside, but we knew that once we came indoors, we were going to have to, anybody who physically worked in the building was going to have to watch the ceremony from their computer. Those individuals who had traveled from, gosh, we had folks from all over the place that had traveled in. Only a handful were going to be able to physically sit together just because of the space limitations. And then the rest of them we were going to have to put into different rooms throughout the headquarters to watch it virtually. So it was really, it was not going to be pretty. So we were very, very grateful that we were able to do it outdoors, even though it was beastly, beastly hot. So this is just what went into the, this is just the basic stuff that went into the invitation, into the envelope. Next slide. This next slide shows you all of the hard copy inserts that we had to put in there. Now, because of COVID, we were still limiting the number of folks that could physically come on post. You couldn't just show up and go to the visitor center when we initially started with COVID procedures. They had loosened them up a little bit, but that would mean that all of our guests would have to physically go to the visitor center and wait in line to get a pass. So what we did is we collected all the information, and those individuals that were coming for multiple days, we were able to get them a multi-day pass that they had to physically go and pick up prior to the day of the ceremony. And then we had the individuals who were just going to be coming for the ceremony, but we still had to vet everybody. We couldn't just let folks show up with an ID card. So they had to have their names on a list, and then they would show their ID card when they came in. I don't know if you guys were tracking the Real ID requirements they were starting to put them in place before COVID, and then they had to kind of pump the brakes a little bit. But so prior to COVID, we also had the Real ID restrictions. So folks who were from states that had the Real ID, they had to physically, if their states had already had full implementation, those folks had to have that form of ID. And then once COVID hit, they had to pump the brakes a little bit because we weren't able to, folks weren't able to go to the DMV and get their, like, for instance, the North Carolina Real IDs. So we had to look at alternate means of identification and make sure that folks were, especially the family members, make sure that everybody was able to get on post. But if you look at all of this, this is a whole lot of stuff to be stuffing in a doggone envelope, and making sure that those people who are invited to only certain parts, like not everybody was invited to the retirement party, not everybody was invited to the promotion party, not everybody was invited to the promotion ceremony. So it made it a little bit more difficult for us to figure out who was getting what invitations, and make sure we didn't, send the wrong invitation to the wrong person. Next slide, please, ma'am. So again, I said we use that e-invitation, and there's a couple of other ones that are out there. I know that there's some commercial ones. Again, if you may find that you're actually eligible to use this particular program, and I've got my contact information in the back of the slide deck, so that if you are interested in it. But this is our preferred method of invitation. We use this for ceremonies, we use it for social events, we use it for conferences, any kind of registration process. We're able to actually link, if we're doing a conference, we can actually link in payment, so that when folks check in, we have limited contact with them. All they have to do is pick up their packet, and they're registered, and everything's good to go. So this is a pretty simple evite that we would potentially put out there for individuals who are coming, and they would just fill it out, hit send, and it would populate. It populates into an Excel spreadsheet that you can download, and then you can sort it and set up your RSVP list from that. Next slide. And these are some of the things that you can attach to it. So we were able to attach the maps and attach everything. We didn't have to worry about stuffing envelopes. We had different invitations. All we had to do was separate our lists based on the electronic guest lists that the generals provided us, copy the emails into the to line and basically hit send, and then they would go online and automatically be able to download all the paperwork that they needed and all the instructions. Next slide. This is what the COVID, right in the middle of the pandemic, electronic invitation started looking like. And you can see that the information, it was like information overload. Folks were like, oh my God, I can't even look at this doggone invitation on one slide or on one screen. I got to scroll through it. But it does basically give you all the information. And the good news is on this one, we can actually hyperlink the Facebook links. We can hyperlink any of the, like if it's a DoD Teams meeting, we can hyperlink it to that. And all they have to do is click on it and they can get into it. And then we can go in and ask how they're actually going to attend. So in this particular one, this was a part of the change of command we did. We asked folks if they were going to attend in person, if they were going to, or they were going to attend virtually or be unable to attend, because it was real important for like the chief of staff of the Army and for the honorees to be able to acknowledge those individuals, especially some of their elderly family members who weren't able to travel. We could do actual individual shout outs and recognize those people that were watching from Poughkeepsie or watching from, we had a couple of folks that actually watched from overseas as well. And it kind of gives them a feeling that they're not forgotten and that they, they're just as special as they were, even though they weren't able to attend in person. Next slide. So for that particular event, the change of command, like I said, we had about 700 people, 600, probably 650 people who RSVP'd, and maybe at least 50 to maybe even 100 folks who just kind of showed up, which is not unexpected. So we had 6 tents, and what we did was we color coded each of the tents. And then what we did, because again, we wanted to make sure that folks felt comfortable, that we still wanted to limit the number of folks that our people were coming in contact with. Because, we were still very much concerned, even back in July, that we were going to end up being on CNN for having some kind of super spreader event or something like that. And that it was going to be all over the front of the Army Times that, FORSCOM had this huge ceremony and blah, blah, blah. And look at all these people crammed in. So what we did was we set up tables at each end of the entrances to where the venue was. And we had what we call our YAZA cover cards, that you are seated at cards, and we printed one for each couple or each individual, and we attached it to the YAZA cards so that when they got it, it was like in this particular one, it's a Sergeant Major Mrs. Balmer. And then when they flipped the card over, they could see that they were seated in tent number 2. So as they walked up to the tents were each color coded, and we had ushers and escorts at each tent who could kind of keep an eye on the different colored cards so that they could, without even really coming in very close contact with them, just kind of direct them, tent, the orange tent number 3 is this way. And then once they got there, they were able to see, we blew up copies of the seating chart. They could actually see where they were seated, or the usher, the escort could come up to them and ask their name, and then actually direct them to their seats. And it worked out splendidly. We did the same thing for the indoor promotion ceremony. We had folks who were seated on the floor. It was kind of a stadium seating. We had folks who were seated on the floor, and we basically separated it, floor, right side, floor, left side, stadium seating, whatever section it was. And it made the seating and it made the contact, again, with folks that we don't know. At that point, we didn't know if everybody was vaccinated. Not everybody was wearing a mask. So it kind of made folks feel a little bit safer about coming to the event, and those folks that were asked to actually support the event, which is just as important. Next slide. So this is one of our ceremonies, and I know I've got all of these funny germy looking things, but literally this was what one of our ceremonies might have looked like pre-COVID. I mean, so the room that we did this in, the actual max for that particular room is about 79. But because of the stairs, I mean, you can pretty much get in and out if there had been an emergency. This is one where we had literally jam-packed. We had people that were standing on the stairs. We had people up on the next level that were looking over. I mean, everybody was up on each other. Definitely, this would have been a super spreader event to beat all super spreader events during COVID. So we had to go back and actually look at, oh my God, how are we going to protect people when it's one thing when they're outdoors and, you know, you get the fresh air and stuff. How are we actually physically going to protect folks once they come into the headquarters? So what we had to do is we had to do an access list for one thing. So we had to, those individuals who didn't have regular access to the building, we had to put their names down and they had to physically come in and get screened before they could come into the ceremony area. Next slide. So this promotion ceremony that we did for our command surgeon, this was literally one of the very first ceremonies that we did in the building when we started lifting the numbers. And if you look at that little note in the bottom, so this is a room that the max fire code max is about 79 folks. We were limited to 10 people, and that included those individuals who were actually supporting the event. So we had to count the narrator, we had to count the photographers, we had to count the Skype operator, and we had some folks that were pretty ticked off that they couldn't bring their entire family in. That's that landing I was telling you about where we would have standing room only and folks kind of looking over. I mean, it was really, and then you'll see, so family members, we pretty much were like, well, you guys travel together, so we're going to assume that you guys are either vaccinated. Well, at this point, everybody had to be vaccinated, but that you guys are comfortable sitting up next to one another. But everybody else had to be seated 6 feet. You know, we had to space everybody out 6 feet. Like I said, spouses and family members, we could seat a little bit closer than that. But we had to, yeah, it was really, really tough because especially for this one, this guy's going to 1-star general. That's a very significant promotion there. And he was not able to have everybody there. He just had his wife and his daughters and one of the boyfriends that was their fiance or something like that. And then we had the General Garrett was there with with Mrs. Garrett, his wife, and then the Sergeant Major who was helping, and he was actually one of the participants in the ceremony. I mean, it got to the point where I couldn't even be in the room if we busted the 10-person max. So what I would do is we have that little gift table there. We would lay everything out. So instead of having somebody handing the rank to the general to do the promotion, we would literally have to teach them how to do it on their own because we just could not have any more people in that room. It was crazy. Next slide. So then this is what it kind of looked like when we had our first event downstairs. Again, this was post-pandemic. However, we were still mindful. This is where we're meeting the 79 max on the floor. And again, that did include the folks that were supporting. We used to put the narrator on the floor, but what we found is if we put the narrator on that mid-level, we were able to not count that person against the number of people physically on the floor, and it also protected the narrator a little bit better from coming in contact, especially when we were still masked up and the narrator needed to remove his or her mask so that they could actually be heard, when they were narrating a ceremony. You'll see that on the at the top we've got the family, so we weren't too concerned about them catching cooties from one another because they all arrived together and they were all going to go back to their house and have a big party, so that wasn't an issue. And then if you look at the bottom portion, that's where we started seating couples, and then we were spacing everybody. We weren't quite at 6 feet, but we were able to space folks so that they could actually attend these ceremonies and still have some level of comfort. And again, at this point, everybody was vaccinated, but we were still in some instances, folks were still wearing masks. And then those individuals that you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, so up there on that landing, we have the ability to seat the other folks up there, and then we're also limited as the number of folks we could have up there, and we had to have them socially distanced as well. Next slide. So this is a copy of one of our conferences, and as you can see in this one, pre-COVID, we had folks that were seated all 10 folks per row on each side, and they were literally sharing a table. So we could have 2 people at each of the tables, and there were 5 tables that made up each of the rows. This is just a doggone flu, monkeypox, COVID, any kind of whatever the latest trend is. This is one of those events where if you didn't have it when you came in, you were gonna have it when you left. Next slide. So then what we had to do was right after they lifted the restrictions and said, okay, you can start having some of your events in person, but we still want to have some of you guys are just going to have to view it via VTC or via Teams, or some folks that are physically in the building, they could actually watch from their desk. So what we've done is we've actually cut down the number of folks at the table, at the rows. So again, we still have the 5 tables that make up a row, but each individual person is at a particular table. And then you can see in the back that we blocked off some of the seats so that there's very few people that are sitting together. Obviously, if they work together, like we had some staff members from the headquarters, they work together in the same office, so they were able to sit in some of the open seats in the back, and they weren't too concerned about masking up. They all knew each other's vaccination status, I guess you could say. So that wasn't going to be an issue. And again, we still encourage folks, I think at this particular one, they were required to wear masks and socially distance. One other thing that we did during this time is we typically do box lunches and things like that for events this size. So we had to figure out how in the heck are we going to feed these folks and not come in contact with them or minimize the amount of contact that we had. So what we did was we basically split the room in half, and the individuals who were on the right side of the room, we had to organize and figure out who sat where, and based on the seating charts, we divvy up the box lunches, put name tags on them, which we had not done in the past, and then have them come out, grab their lunch, and then they could go back into the room. The things that ended up being a little bit more time consuming, and some of them we just, decided on the spot that that's how we were going to do it. We did a lot of prepackaged foods, which was really very annoying because we used to do hot breakfast foods. We would have, all kinds of pastries. We would have quiche. We would have, stuff that they could stand around and chow down on, and we didn't have to worry about anybody coming in contact with anything. We had to cut back on that and do a lot of prepackaged stuff, and it was not pretty in the beginning, but again, we kind of had to adapt and overcome, and we found out that people really, really missed some of the things that we were doing previous to that we didn't even really think that they noticed. We were just kind of doing it, and we never got any bad reviews about it, but the folks who'd been here before would say, wow, I sure missed the quiche, or I sure missed this, or when you guys used to do this. We had to cut down on our social events. We would have a big social event that first night while they were there. Well, we couldn't have Mission Barbecue come in and have folks wandering around and talking to each other and eating and having to take their masks off. So some of that stuff kind of went by the wayside. We're starting to really get back into actual more of the social events now that those restrictions have been lifted. And as with every one of our events, we always give a survey so that we can kind of gauge where we're at, and so that we could sit back after the fact and do our after action review. Next slide. And part of that is the evaluation, and what did we do? Did we perform? Did we meet our mission expectation? Um, of anticipating their needs and making sure that all their basic needs are taken care of, so that they could again fully concentrate on the issue that brought them to Forces Command in the first place. Did we create a distraction-free event? Did we have minimal disruption? Were we able to stick the uh, uh, make sure that the comms didn't drop, or when the comms did drop, were we able to react? Were we able to get folks in the conference room that didn't necessarily have access to it, that needed it? What did we learn from the event? We're always looking for ways that we could do things better. Um, Whether it's just tweaking a name tag, or it's tweaking how we do registration or whatnot. And what did we manage to keep everybody from um, catching anything that they didn't necessarily have when they got to the headquarters? And then for me, because I'm all about having fun, um, did we continue to have fun and still be able to relax a little bit and enjoy the event, enjoy the people that we had coming in, and get to know those folks without having to worry about, you know, catching something, or them feeling uncomfortable that they might be exposed to something that they may not have been exposed to prior to um, prior to coming to visit with us. Next slide. And then, of course, we had to decide, hey, what do we want to keep? What are we not going to do now that we're started to lift up the our some of those restrictions? I will tell you that one of the best things that we have done is most of our battle rhythm events, or our meetings. For those of you who are not familiar with that term, that's the events that happen. Like, we have certain events that happen every week unless it's a holiday. So if it's a Wednesday morning meeting, unless it's a holiday, very rarely will it get canceled for anything else. But if something happens, that meeting will go on whether the individual who set up the meeting is there or not. Somebody else will take the lead. A lot of those meetings are still virtual, which actually allows more people in on the meeting that probably needed to be in the meeting to begin with, without having to come into an environment where you got people piled up on one another. We still don't let guests just drop in. They have to physically go to the gate and get those passes, or they have to physically be, we have to do a letter for an exception to policy for them to come into the headquarters. And at any time, we can administer the mask policy. We can have temperatures checked. We can have guards at the doors, making sure that the individuals are following the protocols for that. We've continued to have the in-person and the virtual options for meetings and ceremonies. We found out that a lot of folks who, especially for the ceremonies, folks who couldn't come in and would miss it unless they somebody videotaped it and sent them a copy or sent them copies of the pictures. They're actually able to participate in some of these meetings and ceremonies, and that's always good. We continue to enforce the max occupancy rates, which again, I don't know about you guys, but I didn't get the flu last year. And that was probably because, we were wearing masks and stuff. And I continue to wear, if I'm on mass transportation, I just flew back from Oklahoma City. I will continue to wear masks and things like that when I'm going to be in an environment that I can't control. And I think that we're going to see around here, if nothing else, I'm hoping that folks will take the initiative to do those types of things when they don't necessarily feel well, and they're not going to feel like they're being ostracized for it. So that's good. We still have folks in the building that wear masks because they've either been, they've recently had COVID, or they've been exposed to somebody, or they're immune deficient, and then they absolutely need to wear it. And there's no shame in that. And those grab and go food options has actually been a plus, because we had folks who were doing literally like it was kind of a one-upsmanship. So when you had a ceremony and somebody brought in, cake and punch, and then the next person would bring in shrimp, and then the next person would bring in a champagne fountain or whatever, and the next person would have catering from some bougie, restaurant. And I mean, it got to be crazy. I tell people, listen, it is just an opportunity for your friends and family to get together. Do cupcakes. That way we don't have to have somebody cutting cake. You don't have to have somebody in your face. You can do bottled water, grab and go sodas. And some of that stuff, I just encourage folks to do it. Save your money for the after party at your house, where the people that you're inviting to your house, if they're germ free, or if they've been vaccinated, or you work with them and that you're not going to catch anything from them. And that has really, 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 you could just see the weight lifted from folks' shoulders when they realized that they didn't have to have Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus come in and entertain during their ceremony reception. And then, of course, we still are very much into the ad hoc or situational telework as an accepted business practice. And be surprised at the number of supervisors who were dead set against that teleworking from home until they realized what an advantage it was. And so even now, if we've got, those of us who have elderly parents, or if you've got kids at home that can't go to school because somebody's got, whatever, and also for weather. So it's kind of a win-lose situation, because it used to be if it was a snow day or something like that, that we got a free day off. Now they anticipate that it's going to be bad weather, and we end up with take your computers home, you get to work from home, kind of like the kids going to school. So I personally like it, any opportunity that I can to work from home in my pajamas. Next slide. So I am here to answer any questions that you might have. If you guys have any desire to get hooked up with the AFIT e-invitation process, I'd be glad to give you some information on that. I'm here again till the end of the year, so I can answer any and all protocol questions, even if it's something that we didn't talk about today. So the floor is yours.
Looking at those floor plans made me dizzy. That must have been a nightmare. Goodness.
Oh, let me tell you, when we did the 700 people, we had at least 650 people that had to be sat by name. And we had a lot of elderly folks who were still very much conscious about the COVID stuff, and were wearing masks. Oh my God. And it was so brutally hot out there. But yeah, again, if anybody got the vid from us, we didn't hear about it.
It's also good to hear about the food and beverage stuff. We are thinking a little bit more about that and being thoughtful about what we can provide grab and go wise that kind of cuts budgets, which has been a plus. So.
Right. And then going back, so we would have 200 folks, let's say, at a conference, and we would do like 3 menu choices. And they would just we'd say, okay, this is what's going to be available, first come, first serve. So what we found out is that we couldn't do that because people tend to linger. At that point, they were still wearing masks, which is why they had to go back into the conference room where they could be socially distanced before they could eat. So that's where we started thinking, okay, we need to ask them specifically what they want. So you got at that point, we were probably down to maybe 100 people that were coming in person. But we had to actually go through and do a name tag for each person, and then divide it by each side of the room, and then put them in alphabetical order. And then you tell these guys, okay, if you're sitting on the right side of the room, you need to exit through the right door. If you're on the left side of the room, and then they'd go to the wrong line and then say, well, I've got a lunch ticket. I know I ordered lunch. And which side of the room were you sitting on? Oh, I was sitting on this side. Yeah, your lunch is on the other side. So we still have those. Some of those things we're just not going to be able to overcome.
I'm laughing over here because that feels about right. Other folks have questions. And he said they've gone back to hot buffet. Just jealous of the grab and go.
Yeah. And if you'll advance to the next slide. So I do have my contact information. If anybody has any kind of protocol questions, any questions about government protocol, like I said, I'm going to be retiring at the end of the year. My last day physically in the office is going to be the 2nd of December. But Danielle, I will share the information for some of my colleagues, and I'll send you my group email so that you can share that. And honestly, we get questions about all kinds of stuff from all kinds of folks. About flag presentations, how to seat military with government. We've got a really great precedence list that we use that we could absolutely share if anybody was interested in that, because it talks about local and local government, state government, and even federal government, and who outranks who and all that other good stuff. So we are just a clearinghouse of knowledge.
That's lovely. I know our members will appreciate that, especially I feel like most of us work mostly with state. I think Camden is maybe the only one that's a contractor for federal, but lots of us work with state that are in our chapter currently. So yeah, that's always good.
Yeah. And we're really starting to, I know with the Army, we're really starting to make sure that we incorporate some other, like Native American uh, precedents, things that we didn't have 20 years ago because they weren't necessarily as recognized as they are today. And we'd start getting questions about it. And finally, somebody had to sit down and say, hey, this is what this is what the equivalent is. So I'm really, really happy about that. And then when you get down to, like I said, state government, who outranks who. And then after that, of course, like I think I talked a little bit about it the last time when I talked about flags and precedents and stuff. Some of that stuff, you just freewheel it. But as long as you've got a rhyme or a reason, even if it's not 100% correct, folks will understand why you did it. And they won't be as critical about why you did what you did.
All right. I don't see any other questions come through. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see everybody. But thank you, Elisabeth. This was great. I'm glad to see we had sort of a timeline of where we were, then what happened, and sort of where we got back to. So thank you again.
Semi-normal.
Yeah, a somewhat normal, whatever this new thing is we're doing. Thank you so much. And yeah, congrats on your retirement.
Thank you.
We're excited for you.
I'm so excited.
Absolutely. But if anybody has any questions, they can certainly, email you directly or email me, and I'll get that from all the slides and whatever else you've got to share to the group, and also post this to anybody that couldn't make it today. And then as a reminder to our group, November 9th and December 7th are our next 2 meetings for the year. So mark your calendars, and we will see everybody face to face. Thank you guys so much. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you, and stay cootie free.
Yeah, that's right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.